Hey everyone, it's Glenn Greenwald back with a new episode of System Update exclusively on Rumble, and I'm back to show you and examine the mountain of data, of conclusive, definitive evidence demonstrating how authoritarian self-identified followers of the Democratic Party have become. Now, authoritarian is a word that gets cast around a lot in our political debate. It's probably almost certainly the case that in some occasions there are factions or groups or wings of each political faction that have authoritarian tendencies. But when you examine this data that I'm about to show you and really compile it and look all at once at it, it is extraordinary, no matter how low your expectations are of Democrats, how authoritarian they have become, particularly in the wake of the Trump years. And again, it's not going to be my word or my analysis or my speculation or my interpretation on which I'm going to be asking you to rely, but simply the hard, concrete evidence, the data demonstrating how it is that they think and how they now hold widely, classically authoritarian views. So let's take a look, first of all, at a relatively new research survey from Pew in August of 2021, so just 2 months ago, that asked about whether Americans want both tech monopolies, but also the government to censor the internet in the name of combating false information. The whole idea of the internet when it emerged in the 1990s, and the reason people were so euphoric about it for the next decade was because it was supposed to liberate us from centralized corporate and governmental control. It was supposed to empower human beings to communicate amongst ourselves ideas and information without having to depend upon or be constrained by large corporations or especially governments. And yet, as we know, increasingly, both the government and large corporations have imposed a stranglehold on what we are and aren't allowed to say online when it comes to political speech. And this survey was designed to determine how Americans feel about that, and particularly how they feel about that based on their partisan identity. And the results are incredibly stark. You see the headline of the graph from Pew that reads, "Partisan divisions have widened over the role of government tech firms in restricting misinformation." So if you look at this first part of the chart, which is on the left, they ask all Americans, all adults, quote, the percentage of people who believe, quote, the U.S. government, not Facebook or Google, the U.S. government should take steps to restrict false information online, even if it limits freedom of information. And that blue line that you see skyrocketing from 2018 to 2021 represents the views of self-identified Democrats and Democratic-leaning partisans, and you see it going up by 25 points from 40% in 2018 to 65%. Just under 2/3 of Democrats want the government that their party controls, at least at the moment, to censor the internet and to restrict what the government deems false information, even if it means limiting freedom of information. You see the line from the red line, which is Republicans going in the opposite direction. It began already in 2018 lower than Democrats. Only 37% wanted the government to do that, but now only 28% of Republicans favor that. So it's a difference of almost 40 points. Almost 40 points, this huge gap of Democrats who want the government to censor the internet and Republicans who do not. On the question of whether they want tech companies, giant corporations that they claim usually they distrust, to take steps to restrict false information. So we're talking about Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon. Do you trust companies like this to restrict false information from online, even if it limits freedom of information? 76% of Democrats, 3/4 of Democrats, want tech giants to control and police and restrict the internet, even if it means losing freedom of information, whereas only 37% of Republicans favor that. So again, a huge gap. Now, just this chart alone, if you think about what is an authoritarian mindset, you could obviously list multiple examples, but one leading one of which would be that our speech, our political discourse should be controlled not by us and should not be free, but should be controlled by corporate power, centralized corporate power, and by the government. And that specifically the internet should no longer be free, but controlled by those institutions. That's what Democrats overwhelmingly favor. How can anyone deny that Democrats have become incredibly authoritarian, no matter what you want to say about Republicans, which we'll get to, when it's Democrats who overwhelmingly favor both government and corporate control of the internet in the name of political speech and combating misinformation, while Republicans overwhelmingly want the internet to remain free? Those numbers are just indisputable. Now let's look at a separate line of questions to see how authoritarian Democrats have become, and that is people's opinion of the secret security services that have long dominated American politics outside of democratic accountability, institutions like the CIA and the FBI. Here is a 2018 survey from Pew that has a headline that asked those questions and concluded, quote, majorities express favorable opinions of several federal agencies, including the FBI. So majorities of Americans have a favorable opinion of the FBI in 2018, but the subheadline tells the real story, which is Republicans' views of FBI have grown more negative in the past year. And if you look at the actual breakdown, you'll see how wide the partisan divisions are, that Democrats overwhelmingly revere and approve of and place their trust and faith in the FBI, whereas Republicans do not. Here's the graphic that reads, partisan gap in favorable opinion of FBI widens, driven by decline in positive views among Republicans. Among Republicans or Republican leaders, you see that line dropping for favorable views from 71% in 2010 to 55% in 2018. The disapproval number has gone way up, whereas for Democrats, look at this gap. It's over here. Look at this gap. It's as if there's almost no distrust any longer among Democrats for the FBI. 78% of Democrats approve of the FBI. Only 12% say they have an unfavorable opinion of the FBI. Now, why does having such a political party, which almost unanimously places their faith and trust in the FBI, make them authoritarian? Let's look at what the FBI actually is. Before we do that, here's one other interesting and revealing chart from that same poll that shows that not only is there this huge gap among the FBI, 8% of Democrats approving of the FBI, only 55% of Republicans, but for the CIA, 69% of Democrats, 69% approve of the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency. 62% of Republicans in 2018 do. I'm about to show you a poll shortly where in 2021, the number of Republicans that now trust the CIA has collapsed. So the partisan breach is even bigger, but 70% of Democrats approve of the CIA, 78% of the FBI. If that's not an authoritarian party, someone tell me what is. The Pew analysts tell the story, quote, today the 23% percentage point gap in views of the FBI among Republicans and Democrats is among the widest of the 10 agencies and departments asked in the survey, while 78% of Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents have a favorable opinion of the FBI. 55% of Republicans and Republican leaners say the same. They go on to say, views among Democrats are little changed in recent years. A wide share, 78%, is favorable toward the FBI, compared with just 12% of Democrats who give unfavorable ratings. As a result, today, the 23% point gap in favorable ratings among Republicans and Democrats stands at its widest on record. More than ever today, Democrats trust the FBI and Republicans do not. Why is that so significant? Let's look at what the FBI is. There is the headquarters of the FBI in Washington. That's where people like James Comey and Robert Mueller, when he was the FBI director, Christopher Wray, the whole litany of FBI directors, J. Edgar Hoover, worked when They were running the FBI, and appropriately, the name of the building in which the FBI's headquarters is situated is still called the J. Edgar Hoover FBI building, named after the FBI director who terrified and terrorized our elected officials for decades by keeping secret dossiers on them to ensure that none of them could ever challenge him without knowing that he had the ability to destroy their lives. That is what this institution always has been and continues to be, that Democrats overwhelmingly revere. And in the past 15 years, we've had countless pieces of evidence showing that the abuses by the FBI of our basic political rights and of the law is not something of the distant past, but continues very much as vibrant as ever. Here's a 2007 Reuters headline that references a report that the FBI abused its power to get private records. So going back to 2007, under the Bush administration, they were simply violating the law to get private records on whoever they wanted. Here in 2009, 2 years later, yet another Justice Department audit that flags FBI privacy abuses from ABC. Two reports show violations stemming from national security investigations. And ABC in 2009 detailed the abuses of the FBI. Quote, two Justice Department audits out Thursday highlight reported FBI abuses and the gathering of personal information for national security cases, despite concerns raised by judges. The department found that the FBI requested 192,500 records with no judicial review. In between 2003 and 2006, that was when Robert Mueller, the honorable, esteemed hero of liberal America, was running the FBI. So back to 2003, in 2007, in 2009, we find the FBI that Democrats revere and approve of and love continuously and systematically abusing the core civil liberties of American citizens, our privacy rights, and exceeding their legal limits. Now, here in 2013, 4 years later, is a comprehensive report by the ACLU entitled Unleashed and Unaccountable: The FBI's Unchecked Abuse of Authority. So these systemic problems were continuing no matter how many reports were issued by the Justice Department proving the FBI was systemically abusing its power. It simply continued. Here's the ACLU's report in 2013. You see there the symbol of the FBI crumbling up and burning the Constitution, which is what the FBI exists to do. And here's what the ACLU reported 2013 said, very similar to the 2003, 2007, 2009 reports. Quote, the FBI has exploited secret interpretations of the laws governing domestic surveillance to expand its reach and simply ignored other legal restrictions designed to protect our constitutional rights. It has frustrated congressional, judicial, and public oversight through excessive secrecy, official misrepresentations of its activities, and suppression of government whistleblowers and the press. It goes on. Even more opaque are the FBI's intelligence and law enforcement exploits abroad. American citizens traveling overseas have been detained by foreign governments at the behest of the U.S. government and interrogated by FBI agents. Other Americans were blocked from flying home because they were placed on the U.S. government's no-fly list and then were pressured to become FBI informants when they sought redress at U.S. embassies. The ACLU report concludes such abuse is the inevitable product of a deliberate effort by Congress, two presidents, meaning Bush and Obama, and successive attorneys general to vest the FBI with the powers of a secret domestic intelligence agency. This is the institution with the long record, not going back to the Cold War, but within the last 15 years, of constant privacy abuses and illegalities and attacks on dissidents and every abuse conceivable that close to 80% of Democrats approve of and place their faith in. That is why I say the incontrovertible data demonstrates how authoritarian the Democratic Party has become. And it's so ironic. I spent my career as a journalist reporting on and denouncing the abuses of this security state, only to watch the Democratic Party become the leaders in revering and supporting and approving of this agency. And then they turn around often and say to me, what happened to you? What happened to them? This FBI that has long on the left been regarded correctly as pernicious and toxic in suspicion is now overwhelmingly revered. The FBI abuses continued well past that FBI, the ACLU report in 2013. Here in 2019 is a USA Today article headlined Inspector General Report on FBI's FISA Abuse. Tell us one thing. We need radical reform. The USA Today article, yet another report documenting the FBI's systemic abuses. Quote, in a bombshell report yesterday, the Justice Department Inspector General found that the Federal Bureau of Investigation made, quote, fundamental errors and persistently deceived a secret court to authorize surveilling a 2016 Trump presidential campaign official. The FBI lied to the FISA court in order to spy on a former Trump official during the 2016 presidential campaign. If that is not authoritarian, someone tell me what is. The article goes on to state, under the headline, a litany of missteps by the FBI, making clear that these are not isolated abuses, but systemic ones. Quote, the IG report concluded FBI officials made 17, quote, significant inaccuracies and omissions in its submission to the FISA court to secure warrants to target former Trump advisor Carter Page. Quote, FBI personnel fell far short of the requirement in FBI policy that they ensure that all factual statements in a FISA application are, quote, scrupulously accurate. The article goes on to state, we identified multiple instances in which factual assertions relied upon in the first FISA application were inaccurate, incomplete, or unsupported by appropriate documentation based upon information that the FBI had in its possession at the time the application was filed. How is it that 80% of Democrats support an institution like this unless they're complete authoritarians? What is the alternative explanation for this overwhelming support among Democrats, self-identified followers of the Democratic Party? Now, those abuses finally led to an actual guilty plea. In August of 2019, the investigation of special counsel John Durham, who was appointed by former Trump Attorney General William Barr and is now supervised by Attorney General Merrick Garland, Joe Biden's Attorney General, secured a guilty plea by an FBI lawyer who admitted he lied. He distorted emails, submitted altered emails to the FISA court in order to spy on Carter Page. This is the agency that Democrats revere. Now, as I indicated earlier, that was a 2018 survey, which has only worsened in the last 3 years. Here is a poll from 2 weeks ago by Gallup, designed to ask the same questions and survey the same attitudes, namely the attitude of Americans toward particular federal agencies and what partisan divide exists among them with regard to these agencies. And what they have found is that this huge gap between Democrats revering both the FBI and the CIA on the one hand and Republicans disapproving it on the other, that I just documented to you, has gotten considerably worse in the last 3 years. The reverence that Democrats have for these agencies are either staying the same or increasing, while Republican faith in them and independent faith in them is collapsing. So let's look at this chart, which is entitled Changes in Democratic Ratings of Federal Government Agencies and Departments from 2019 to 2021. And you'll see there that the red is the percentage of Democrats approving of particular agencies in 2021 versus the blue, which is the percentage that they approved of in 2018. And for the FBI, you see there that it remains essentially the same, that it was 66% of Democrats approving of the FBI in 2018, 66% in 2021, continue to. So slightly different figures for Gallup than for Pew, but still nonetheless 2/3 of Democrats approving of the FBI. And for the CIA, there has been a slight decrease, but still overwhelming support. 61% of Democrats approving of the CIA in 2021, now down to 55%. So a majority of Democrats continuing to express faith and trust in both the CIA and the FBI. We see exactly the opposite trend when it comes to Republicans. So there you see on the screen for the FBI, the trust that Republicans place in the FBI went from 46% in 2019 to 26% in 2021. Only 1 out of every 4 Republicans trust the FBI, in contrast to the overwhelming majority of Democrats. And for the CIA, it's even starker. You have 59% of Republicans trusting the CIA in 2018. That number is now down to 25%. And the Republicans track the trends of independents. For independents in 2021, you see there that only 40% of them, 41% trust the FBI, and only 42% trust the CIA. So small percentages of independents and Republicans trust these two security state institutions, while they remain incredibly popular among the Democratic Party. It isn't just tech monopolies and the government that Democrats trust to censor the internet, nor is it the CIA and the FBI that Democrats overwhelmingly trust as well. They also overwhelmingly support and love and place their faith in the corporate media, which is held in extremely low esteem, but would be held in even lower esteem if not for the fact that, for good reason, they remain very popular with the Democratic Party. So here is the most recent Gallup poll on media, on how Americans view the media, from just a week ago on October 7th. You see the headline: Americans' trust in media dips to the second lowest on record. The U.S. media is now more unpopular in the United States than at any time it has ever been, with the exception of the 2016 election. There you see the Gallup analysis. Americans' trust in the media to report the news fully, accurately, and fairly has edged down 4 percentage points since last year to 36%, making this year's reading the second lowest in Gallup's trend. In all, 7% of U.S. adults, 7%, say they have, quote, a great deal, and 29% a fair amount of trust and confidence in newspapers, television, and radio news reporting, which combined is 4 points above the 32% record low in 2016 amid the divisive presidential election campaign between Trump and Clinton. In addition, 29% of the public currently registers, quote, not very much trust, and 34%, quote, have none at all. So overwhelmingly, again, here you have 63% of the public saying they have not very much trust or none at all in the corporate media. And that would be much lower if not for the fact that, as you see on this chart, Democrats are keeping these ratings inflated because Democrats, like they do for all institutions of authority, revere the corporate media. Here you see the 3 lines, the red representing Republicans, the center line representing independents, and the blue line representing Democrats. Only 11% of Republicans trust the corporate media. Independents, 31%. And then Democrats, close to 70%. So you see how high this line is, and you see that there was a huge spike in the Democratic Party's trust for the media in 2016 because of how blatantly and glaringly they sided with the Democratic Party over Donald Trump, and that has continued to be the case for the next 5 years, where the media is incredibly popular only among the Democratic Party, the corporate media, because they know the corporate media is so definitively on their side. So the hallmark of the Democratic Party has become faith and trust in and reverence for the most powerful and centralized institutions of authority and power in the United States. Now, it isn't just that they have this mentality. It's also that the fruits of this rotted authoritarianism are starting to become very visible. I probably have spent more time in the last year reporting on the growing authoritarianism in the Democratic Party than any other topic, so I obviously can't give you every example or even many of them in this video because I've devoted so many other articles and reporting and analysis and interviews and even video reports here on Rumble to that topic. But if we just take a look at one example, people have forgotten that 2 of the most important Democrats in the country advocated that American citizens be placed on the no-fly list, one of the worst abuses from the first war on terror, even though they haven't been convicted of, or in some cases even charged with, any crimes, simply by virtue of being suspected to have been at the Capitol on January 6th. Chuck Schumer, the senior Democrat in Washington in Congress, this is the majority leader of the Senate, 6 days after the January 6th riot, demanded that the FBI add anyone at the Capitol to the federal no-fly list. And here is the chairman of the House Committee on Homeland Security, and who was also now the chairman of the Select Committee to investigate January 6th, Benny Thompson, the Democrat from Mississippi, who on the day after, so not even 24 hours after the riot at the Capitol on January 6th, issued a press release in the name of the Committee of Homeland Security demanding that the TSA and FBI must add suspected domestic terrorists to no-fly list and keep them off planes. Now, if you favor allowing unseen bureaucrats in the United States to issue punishments to American citizens in secret with no recourse and no need to prove their guilt in trial, in court, in a hearing, how is it even possible for you to deny that you're authoritarian? Wanting the no-fly list imported from the first war on terror onto domestic soil and used against your political enemies, as two key Democrats, two of the most powerful congressional Democrats, not only advocated but succeeded in doing, is the very crux of what authoritarianism is. We've seen over and over this authoritarianism manifests itself in what the Democratic Party wants. I've spent all year reporting, for example, on how the Democratic-controlled Congress has been summoning the executives of Google, Facebook, and Twitter before them, hauling them to be interrogated, and Democrats explicitly telling them that unless they start censoring the internet even more than they already have, in accordance with the views of the Democratic Party, the ideology of the Democratic Party about what is and isn't hate speech, what is true and what is false, then these companies will be punished with legal and retaliatory reprisals. It has become one of the main priorities of the Democratic Party, if not the main one, to have their enemies silenced, to have these tech companies do what the Constitution prohibits them from doing directly, which is censoring our political discourse in alignment with what the Democratic Party wants. Just yesterday, at my Substack, where you can read the article, I wrote what probably is an article I spent the most time reporting on in the last year, which was all of the different ways that American civil liberties have been trampled in the name of fears of 1/6, exploiting 1/6, calling it an insurrection, claiming it's, in the words of Joe Biden's speechwriters, the greatest attack on American democracy since the Civil War. Things like the no-fly list, things like keeping Americans in prison with no trial in incredibly harsh and brutal conditions, giving more money to the Capitol Police, increasing spying powers and detention authorities to the security state that Democrats revere and continue to trust. But the purpose of the article is to demonstrate that even with this large mountain of abuses, of civil liberties abuses we've seen carried out in the name of investigating 1/6 and punishing those responsible and investigating and surveilling the ideology that allegedly fostered it, the worst abuse of all is this standing or select 1/6 committee itself that is currently chaired by the very same Congressman Benny Thompson, who called for Americans to be placed on the no-fly list with no trial of any kind. And his vice chair is Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who has a long history, as does her family, of instituting authoritarian policies as part of the first war on terror and now as part of the second one. And what makes this committee so pernicious that Democrats have placed all of their bets in, essentially, because the Justice Department, even though it's led by Merrick Garland, has not indicted or charged a single American, not one, with sedition or inciting insurrection or attempting or conspiring to kidnap or kill political officials or any of the other hysterical, deranged accusations that rain down upon them from the media and from the Democratic Party. The Justice Department hasn't charged any of them with that, just like they never charged, the Mueller investigation never charged a single American with being guilty of the conspiracy that the media told Americans they should believe for 5 years, which is that members of the Trump campaign criminally conspired with Russia. And so they have a huge problem, which is that the Justice Department is not prosecuting what happened on January 6th as sedition or treason or as insurrection, nor are they claiming that anyone attempted to murder or kidnap AOC or any of the other political officials who self-victimized so melodramatically for all this time. And so this committee is what they're placing all their bets in to be able to investigate private citizens. And that's what makes it so pernicious. The Constitution assigns the power to investigate private citizens for crimes or suspected crimes to two branches of government, the executive branch through the Department of Justice and FBI, and the judiciary. Congress has no power to do what it's doing here. They do have the power to investigate in certain cases when, for example, they need to do it in order to assert oversight authority over the executive branch. So if they investigate the Iran-Contra scandal or what happened at Benghazi or with the evacuation of Afghanistan, they're carrying out their constitutional role to determine whether or not the executive branch functioned properly and legally. They also have the power to investigate if it helps them write or rewrite new laws. So if they want to rewrite regulations governing the financial industry or Silicon Valley, they can summon the leaders of those companies to help them understand what's happening, to rewrite laws. But that's not what's going on with this 1-6 committee. They are issuing incredibly invasive subpoenas to find out what people were emailing and saying and where they were going and what their political associations are, based solely on the fact that they applied for a permit to hold a protest against what they believed were irregularities in the 2020 election. And ironically, the most important precedents that make clear how unconstitutional it is for Congress to haul before it private citizens to interrogate them about potential crimes and about their political associations come from the McCarthy era, which, whatever you think of the communist threat, is exactly what the House Un-American Activities Committee and Joseph McCarthy tried to do as well, abuse congressional power to investigate what they considered insurrectionary crimes. And the Supreme Court twice said that Congress lacks the constitutional authority to do that. And yet here you have, under Nancy Pelosi's aegis, with Adam Schiff on board, with Adam Kinzinger, with Liz Cheney, with Benny Thompson, with the whole crew, Jamie Raskin, abusing congressional power to persecute and haul before it people based solely on their ideological inclinations and on their constitutional right to assemble and to protest. If crimes were committed on January 6th or in connection with it, the job of investigating that is with the Justice Department and the judiciary, where these citizens have all kinds of safeguards, not with Congress, where they have none. But all of this that we're seeing, this attempt to force companies to censor the internet, the resurrection of the no-fly list, this persecution in the name of 1-6, is all the byproduct of this authoritarian faction that is becoming more authoritarian by the minute, showing that Democrats revere the CIA and FBI, love the corporate media, place their faith in all kinds of institutions, including tech monopolies, to censor the internet, even place faith in the government to do that. This is an authoritarian mindset that has convinced them that their cause is so just, that their political adversaries are so threatening, that any of the measures they undertake in the name of winning are inherently just, and that whatever agencies are available or whatever centers of power they can exploit in order to advance those causes, whether it be the CIA and FBI or tech monopolies or the government or congressional authorities, becomes their ally. And that is why we are seeing these incredibly disturbing trends where Democrats are becoming increasingly authoritarian. Now, if you say that, people will instantly make arguments that the Republican Party is authoritarian as well. And maybe that is true. We can have a separate discussion about whether there are authoritarian trends in the Republican Party, but I just showed you extremely convincing data of how the Republican Party's faith in the FBI and the CIA and their belief in the need for internet censorship is rapidly decreasing, not increasing. It's a party that is defending the right of citizens to be free of harassment by the FBI or involvement in our domestic politics by the CIA or internet censorship. That's just the reality based on this polling data. And even with regard to the claim that the Republican Party has been convinced to believe that the 2020 election was fraudulent and was stolen, that too doesn't offer much difference with the Democratic Party, since here's a poll from March of 2018 from YouGov, which determined that 2/3 of Democrats, you can see it here at the end, 2/3 of Democrats not just believe that Russia interfered in the 2016 election, but that they actually invaded polling booths, that they actually invaded the voting system in order to change Donald Trump's votes or Hillary Clinton's votes to Donald Trump's votes. They've been convinced that Donald Trump is an illegitimate president by virtue of this deranged conspiracy theory that their media outlets taught them to believe. So whatever metric you want to use, whatever analytics you want to examine, whatever data you want to study, it points all in one direction. The Democratic Party is an authoritarian party, and it's getting more and more authoritarian by the minute.